everybody, welcome back to the channel. Steven here, Northwest Small Batch Brewing, of course. And cheers. Today is an interesting day because I think I haven't maybe I haven't covered this about the way I brew. But I know that there are other brewing systems like mine that use this, but it's just, there's a lot of different ways to brew beer, right? And a lot of it depends on what kind of home brewing system you have and how old your home brewing system is. And I'm not saying an old brewing system is bad. The opposite, actually. You can make perfectly good beer, all kinds of methods. I find the easiest method for making beer is to use an electric system because you can set the temperature and it will maintain that temperature pretty well for you. The downside, of course, is it doesn't heat up as fast as like a, propane or gas. And, it's harder to heat up a larger volume unless you have, a specially made system. You're kind of limited to how much volume and that element can heat up, unless you move to like a 240 system. Anyway, that's not really what this video is about. But it used to be, and this is still the way you do it. If you have, if you're just starting out, right? You don't want to buy a lot of equipment and really invest in home brewing until you decide whether it's something you're really going to enjoy. So a lot of times people start by making beer on the stove, and you can make perfectly good beer that way. It's basically like a modified brew in the bag slash, I don't know what you call it. Basically, you're taking your grain and somehow you have to mash. If it's on the stove, a lot of times what you do is you bring the water up to your temperature, right? You've got your grain in a muslin bag, and then you turn off the heat, put your grain in, and then you maybe try to wrap your pot up in a sleeping bag or something that can help insulate it for that hour. Sure, it's gonna lose some temperature, and that's just something you have to accept. At that point, if you don't have equipment that can maintain the temperature, you do the best you can, right? My point is, what if you have a small-ish pot that doesn't make, let's say you're trying to make 5 gallons, but there's no way you can have enough water on your stove, to do that. Can you still do it? And the answer is yes, and the answer comes from, yesteryear, right? It's the way that things used to be done. What you do is make a concentrated wort, right? So you're using the same amount of grains you would need for 5 gallons, but you're making it in a much smaller amount of liquid. And so you get a very concentrated, thick wort, which you end up needing to, add water to bring it to the right, you have to dilute it because it's too concentrated. And a lot of times when you add that water, right, you're going to take water and pour it over the grain to rinse the grain, because you might as well get as much sugar out of that grain as you can. And then you get into the whole topic of, does the temperature of the water matter that you sparge with? Now, it used to always be yes. You do want to use a certain temperature of sparge water, because warmer water, you'd think it's going to rinse, the grains better. However, a lot of people have done experiments using just room temperature or tap water, and found that there was really no difference in flavor. Like when they do tests and have people, drink the beer and test it, there was really no difference. So they couldn't, discern anything. So I'm not sure that temperature is really that big a deal when it comes to mash or sparge water. But the point being is, you rinse the grains, dilute your wort. That way you can still get a 5-gallon batch, even if your pot on the stove can't hold that much. Obviously, you still need, a fermenter or something that can hold, that full 5 gallons. Fast forwarding to what I was getting to, which is, I think, a more modern technique, and this is what you see more often, especially with these electric brewing systems. It's called a full volume mash. Full volume mash just simply means you're using the full amount of water that you're going to need so that you can end up with the correct amount at the end of your brew day. So if you're making a 5-gallon batch of beer, you're starting with enough water so that you will end up with 5 gallons in your pot. Now, you can probably imagine what that means. You need a pretty big pot, because if you're doing a 5-gallon batch, you need more than 5 gallons of water to start with, right? I have found, and please don't use this as like the gospel, because it really depends on your brewing system, your altitude, your heating source. What you have to do is spend the first couple of times working with especially a new system you haven't used, and dialing in some of the numbers. So for example, the grain when you mash in is going to absorb a certain amount of liquid. Believe it or not, is quite a bit. Mine, I calculate, absorbs about a gallon of water, my grains. Even just trying to squeeze it and get it out, it still retains about a gallon of water that you just can't get back. So if I'm making a 5-gallon batch, I now need another gallon of water to make it 6 to account for the grain absorption. But we're not done, right? I also have to think about, well, when you're heating the water, some of that is going to come off in steam. You boil it for an hour, so that's going to come off in steam. How much liquid do you lose in an hour from that steam? Again, all that stuff I said before matters. And of course, the volume of liquid, if you're not, depending on how much you're making. For me, if it's like a 5-gallon batch, I usually lose about half a gallon to the air from boiling. So now we've got the 5-gallon to start with, 1 gallon for grain absorption, half a gallon or so. And so now you're at 6.5 gallons. All right. Now, I personally go for a 5.5-gallon batch because I like to have a little breather room. I know there's going to be trube at the bottom, and the protein coagulates at the bottom of your pot after your boil, and there's going to be what we call dead loss, right? So to help account for that, I add an extra half gallon to my recipe because I know I'm going to lose about a half a gallon from all that. So all in all, I start with 7 gallons of water and end up with about 5.5 gallons of wort. And then I lose a half gallon of that wort, to trube and whatnot. So I really end up with 5 gallons of beer. There is software to help you calculate this. I can't speak for all of them because I really only use one, but I do know like Brewer's Friend has a lot of the modern brewing systems in it. So if you use the grain fodder, you can select grain fodder. If you use Brazilla, you can select Brazilla, whatever. You basically tell it and it will kind of know. It has the calculations built in, so you can tell it, I want a 5.5-gallon batch, and it will tell you how much water. Now, some of those numbers you plug in, but it basically estimates how much water you're going to need for your batch of however much you're making. So, always use your brewing software. If you have the space to do it, the full volume mash is handy because there's no sparge, right? Now, you'd think that maybe you would lose something in gravity because you're not rinsing the grains, so you're not getting any extra sugars off of that. And that could be the case, but generally speaking, you kind of build that into your calculation. You know that's going to happen, so you probably use a little bit more grain. But if you follow your software, your brewing software, it should calculate or adjust for that and make sure that you have enough grain to hit the gravity that you want. At any rate, if you were confused about that, that's how I do it, and that's how a lot of modern electric brewing systems work if you have the space. It's just a full volume, no sparging at all. Anyway, I've talked enough. You've stayed till the end. I appreciate that. I'll be back in another week for another video, and until then, thanks for stopping by. Keep on brewing.